This podcast is about podcasting. It's about how to get on podcasts. It's about how to start a podcast. It's about how to repurpose the content on your podcast. And it features a global leader in podcasting, Ronsley Vaz, the creator of We Are Podcast. We're going to be talking about podcasting. We're going to be talking about podcasting. And podcasts are brilliant. They're brilliant at opening doors. They're brilliant at boosting your brand. They're a great way to create repurposable content. And we're really lucky to have someone here right now who is, I would put this guy down as the most knowledgeable person on the topic of podcasts that I am aware of on this planet. And that is because this guy has 3 incredible podcasts. He created the amazing conference We Are Podcast, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I think the next one's coming up in October. He's appeared on a bunch of amazing podcasts like Entrepreneurs on Fire with John Lee Dumas and a bunch of others. And he has an agency called Amplify where he helps B2B brands build and leverage the power of podcasts. So he lives and breathes podcasts. He is Mr. Podcast. Welcome to our open day. Hey, Ronsley, how are you, mate?
I'm really, really well. It's funny because after a while, you hear the intro and you realize, wow, I've been doing this for a long time. So yeah, it's good to be here. Done over 1,500 interviews. So it's the reps that have been put in over the last decade has been there. It's really good to sort of dissect the experience, really.
1,500 interviews. Everybody, by the way, give Ronsley a big fat virtual round of applause. What we'll do is I'm going to ask Ronsley some questions so that we can get to know him a little bit better. Hey, Ronsley, can you remember when we met? Do you know? We've known each other for some time, and I was thinking about this last night, and I do think I know when and how we connected for the first time. Do you remember?
No, I don't. I just remember that you spoke at the first We Are podcast on the Gold Coast, and I had never put on an event before in my life, and I was like, this is crazy that these are the people in marketing and podcasting and business have sort of decided to come to the Gold Coast and be there. So I don't remember how that all came to be. Do you?
I was on your podcast, Bon Appetit. And is that how you say it? I don't know, but it was like your first big podcast. And I don't know how I ended up on it. I don't know how that discussion happened. No. But one thing that I do know is that it was the first time ever I'd been on anyone's podcast. And I was fully just feeling a little bit out of my depth. And you engaged me in a conversation, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but it was a different experience for me because I was used to presenting on stage and all these other things, and you were engaging me in a conversation, and I'm like, okay, this is a little bit weird. It's like we're having a telephone call here on our own, but it's being recorded. That was the first time. Can you remember that?
That's crazy. I never thought that I popped your cherry. I've popped lots of people's podcast cherry. I didn't think I'd pop yours, but anyway. Actually, the first time I met you, I remember now, or met you in the sense that I watched you at the Key Person of Influence product. So the Brand Accelerator, you did the product section in Brisbane. That was my first event that I'd ever sort of been at. And I was kind of blown away by some of the topics that were presented on, because I had never been exposed to profile or products or any of that stuff. So that was my first interaction actually with you. And we had a brief conversation outside after you had done your thing, but I don't think you remember that.
No. So there we go. We met after a conference. I came off stage. I met you. All right, guys and girls, there's a lesson here. I came off stage. I met Ronsley. Ronsley didn't have a presence, didn't have a profile, didn't have anything. And we met, and he reached out and he said, can I get you on my podcast, which was it was called, is it still around, Bon Appetit? That was huge.
Yeah, it's still around. It gets thousands and thousands of downloads, but it's not haven't published since November 2019.
Yeah, there you go. Wow. So longevity there as well. So yeah, so you opened a door with me because of your podcast. Then you held a conference and you invited me to Queensland to go present at the first version of We Are Podcast. If you do have another browser open, go Google We Are Podcast. It's an amazing conference. And as far as I recall, I was the only person speaking at that event in the first year that didn't have a podcast. Right? I think that you came, you invited me to talk about, I think it was the repurposing of content. And I arrived at this thing and everybody else had a podcast but me, and people were like, so what's your podcast, James? And how can I subscribe to your podcast? And I didn't have one. And I've got to say, guys and gals, that was the first year, and it was an incredible conference. Not just what happened during the day, but also the vibe and how everyone connected in the evenings and got to hang out and had breakfast together. It was a brilliant event, right? That was the first one. Then the second one was amazing. Then the third one was amazing. And then the fourth one, COVID struck or something like that. Is that about right?
No, so we did 5. COVID struck one of the 6th one, and then we did virtual, and then we did 2 more virtual, and then we did LA in July, and then this will be our 9th one.
Oh, right, okay. They all blur into one vision of fun presentations, amazing people, and hardcore karaoke. But that's a story for it. That's a story.
Everyone knows you for the karaoke. The pictures are amazing, and we're just so good.
That's a story for another day. So the way that I think that we're gonna run today is what we're gonna do is we're gonna tackle 3 different areas of podcasting. The first one is how to get on the podcasts of other people. The second thing is how to start your own podcast. And the third topic that we had is how to overcome fears. But if we do have a little bit of time at the very end, I think it might be fun to talk about this topic of repurposing, because I think that some of our people would get into that, and you are a master at that particular topic. So let's start with this topic, how to get on other people's podcasts. I meet you at a barbecue, Ronsley. I go, I want to get famous on other people's podcasts. What do I need to do?
Well, I think the first thing is the intention. I think with anything that you start is like, what is the intention of this whole thing? And sometimes we just kind of think it's a good idea to get on other people's podcasts because we'll get exposure, but then what kind of exposure? What is it for? What does it do? Do you have the ecosystem in place? If you get traction, do you have a way to get people to actually engage with the stuff you're doing? So there's all these other elements to actually going on other people's podcasts, and also being of value to that podcast, because easily I get pitched between 5 and 10 times a week, if not more. I'm being very I'm a conservative with that number for people to interview, for me to interview them on my podcast. So one of the biggest misconceptions, I suppose, is first figuring out that podcasters don't have a problem getting guests. So, the idea that podcasters are looking for guests actively is not necessarily that big a deal. Once you have a podcast, you realize that everyone wants to be on your podcast. So, the idea of just being a celebrity and going on other people's podcasts is not necessarily the way to get on other people's podcasts. The way to do it is actually go, what is my intention? How can I co-create for a certain audience? And co-creation is the idea that I want to plant with everyone. Is like, if you know who your audience is and you're going on other podcasts and you have an intention in mind, then you co-create with someone who's putting in a lot of effort. And the last thing a podcast host wants to do is just carry people for the sake of carrying them, right? It's not a thing that we want to do. And so figuring out how you provide that value, what exchange is it going to be like, I tell them that you're going to promote it to your audience if you have one. Like, make it a compelling case that they go, oh yeah, of course, like why not have you on the show?
So I'm going to unpack this a little bit. The first bit was the why. Like, why are you doing it in the first place? Is it for the ego? You've got an itch that you need to scratch because, mummy said I'd never amount to anything. But if I'm on Ronsley's podcast, people will think that I'm industry famous. Is that your why? But you mentioned if you're getting some traction, what's going to be their next step, or what's the infrastructure? Now, the language that we use is, do you have an off-ramp? Can you unpack that a little bit in your world when you're working with your clients? What is their off-ramp? What is their why? What's their goal when they're using a podcast?
So without exaggeration, over the last decade, I've helped like over 1,000 businesses start a podcast, in businesses, brands, personalities, and it's all this sort of the same thing. It's all like everyone's doing it for a reason. They want to return on the effort that they're putting in, right? It's not only and here's the thing: a podcast doesn't only return on investment. A podcast returns on scale, it returns on time, it returns on effort, it returns on energy, it returns on relationships. It is the thing that if you do correctly, 1 hour a week will return on a whole bunch of things if you do it correctly, right? And usually what tends to happen is when someone starts a podcast, they kind of go, I'll create a podcast and I know what's best, and they might know what's best, but the idea is that they create an amalgamation of what they listen to. So if they listen to a whole bunch of long form content, then the chances are that they'll say dumb shit like, my audience doesn't want the edited version of this. They want the whole podcast recording. And that's not the case anymore. Like, people have choice with podcasts, and you want to get into their ears, and you need a share of their ear space, and you're treating it like a repurposing act, and that's not going to fly anymore in the podcasting world. So a lot of things have changed since I started podcasting. I don't have to explain to people anymore what a podcast is, which is the biggest difference. And when I started, like when we had the first conference, there was a lot of, wait, what? What is a podcast? How do I get it? Where is it from? Is it like radio? Do I need to like download it? And now those kind of problems are very different. So for us, it is how does this podcast benefit your business? How does it get you a return? How is it a business development tool rather than a marketing tool or a content tool? That's the biggest difference I want everyone here to understand. Is everyone thinks of a podcast as a marketing tool or a content tool. A podcast is actually the best business development tool that ever existed, because if you just step back a bit and understand, okay, I have a certain type of person that I want. This is my audience. This audience is already with other people. Who has my audience and has no competitive overlap with me? They do different things to what I do, but they do it for the same audience. And then you go about co-creating for this bunch of people, this audience, where you're interviewing your partners and you're having a conversation with a potential partner that could really help you grow your business. So rather than you just kind of go, oh, this is just content, you have the conversation where you're developing the relationship, and then you're doing something like doing a training to their people or giving them value in a way that they go, yes, I want my people to know about what you're doing. So here, let's do this together. Let me share the podcast episode with my audience. And that's how you have, if you're doing a 1 a week podcast, you have 52 business development conversations a year, which if 1, 2, 3 of them convert, can you imagine what that would do for your brand?
So immediately what I'm doing here is we started off with the why. And I said, in our world, we talk about having an off-ramp. And then Ronsley went a little bit deeper there. And he said, well, having an off-ramp is part of it. It's a business development tool. So I'm just going to drop 3 types of measurable, clear, undeniable commercial outcomes. One, Ronsley just said, if you're having 52 conversations with people that could be a potential client, that's 52 conversations a year with someone that could be a potential client. Number 2,
not even before you move to 2, James. So rather than go for the client, go for the people that will have the client. So rather than go for the apple, go for the tree. Well,
that's what I'm saying. There's 3 different outcomes here. 1, it could be the potential client. The 2 is what we call a SMAP. So that's a strategic marketing alliance and partner. So they've already got the audience and they've got the big audience, and that's who it is that you want to reach. Then the third element might be the off-ramp, because they listen to the content and they want to download the show notes, and then they come into your funnel. So you might partner with someone that's got like these massive audiences. So suddenly you're leveraging each other's audiences. Number two, it could actually be, as I said, someone that might end up being a potential client of yours. So if that was your path, that would be 52 conversations a year. Sometimes a potential client can also become a SMAP, that's a strategic marketing alliance and partner. And then you got all these gazillions of people that are listening to the damn thing. And so that is like 3 different highly measurable commercial off-ramps.
That's
now,
not even considering the content that comes out of that.
And that's not even considering the content and then all the other off ramps that come with it. But there you go, guys and girls. There's 3 things just to think about when Ronsley brought up this first initial thing about understanding your why. The second thing that he brought up is he said, what value will you offer? What is the value exchange? So for example, I think someone asked the question, how will I approach these podcasters to perhaps earn myself a spot on their podcast? Can we go there for a second? What are the types of things that you could offer, and what might the value exchange look like? You've used the expression co-create, because I'm assuming we want more than just a win for us. We want a win for us, a win for them, and a double win for everyone, a triple win.
100%. So I have a 10 steps to getting on 100 podcasts. And the first step is intention. The second step is getting your credibility stack done. And that is important to do after the intention, because you know what to add to your credibility stack. And when I'm talking about credibility stack, I'm talking about all the experiences you have, all the things you've done, all the awards you've won, all the cool stuff that you have done in your industry. You've got to put it down in a way that someone kind of reads that and go, wow, I want to talk to this person. Now, if you don't have that and you're putting that in an email, that's like every other person that's praying and praying. They're literally spraying and praying. They're getting data, which now you can get access to all the iTunes hosts from their emails, their socials, their name. So people are getting that data and spamming everyone. So you can see an email that goes, I want to be on your show. This is why I'm cool. And they haven't listened to anything of my podcast, which makes the biggest difference. If you can start by, if you want to get on someone's podcast, by saying, what I love about your show is, that one line will melt every podcaster's heart. And if you know what my wife says to me, I'm joking, let's not go there. But my point is, the best way to a podcaster's heart is by saying, you know what I love about your show, and tell them that.
So we've already covered the why you should be doing it. And there are 3 big business development goals that we've talked about: partners, clients, and off-ramp, and then so much more. In terms of getting on the show itself, Ronsley's got his 10 steps, but one is intention, credibility stack, and what I love. Now, when it comes to pitching, you said, what is the value you offer and what is the value exchange? How early do you bring that stuff up?
Well, almost immediately, right? Because if you're co-creating for an audience, you're trying to say, well, I can add value to your audience and I can make your life easier by giving you this perspective that your podcast hasn't covered yet. So if you're a guest on the show, you got to find value. You got to find a way to vocalize that value to someone that has never met you before. Right? So if you go to bio.ronsleyvaz.com, you'll see an example of what I mean by credibility stack. So it's bio.ronsleyvaz.com. If you go into that in any browser, you'll see what I mean. And in that credibility stack, for me, what I have is a 1-pager, which is really important, which gives any host the links that they can go to, the questions they can ask, the topics that that you can cover and you can talk about, that you're really well versed in. There's a short bio, there's a long bio, there's all these images that kind of prove the things that you've done, the awards that you've won, or any of the reps that you've done. So making sure that that's all in a nice document that's easy for someone to get access to, especially a host who is doing lots of interviews. Your job is to make their life easier, and having this credibility stack makes it a whole bunch easier.
You've used the expression co-create twice. So when we're talking about value and we're talking about value exchange, you've used that expression twice. What do you mean by that word?
Well, usually when we're thinking about an outcome, we're only being selfish, or we're being the exact opposite of selfish, and we're being entirely what's in it for them. And the idea of co-creation is you're not an island, right? Nothing happens in business or in any world without relationships. So if you kind of realize that sooner, you realize that everything that you're doing is a co-creation, whether you're doing it with your clients, or you're doing it with your partners, or you're doing it with people you're meeting for the first time. They're all co-creations, and realizing that you're just part of the equation that has made it possible, so that someone else can come in and allow themselves to be to shine. Then you're not having to jump into a conversation to keep proving how cool you are, right? You hear a lot of hosts kind of like interrupting the guest and telling them, "Oh yeah, I understand that because I did this cool shit." No one cares. Like, right? Just give the guest their space, give them the stage, be a good host. And that's the difference. Is like, I suppose every business owner that starts a podcast has to learn to be a podcaster, learn to be a host, learn to like be welcoming, learn to ask good questions. So that is the part that takes reps.
In a way, I guess it's kind of like the mindset. It's a mindset when you're coming in. It comes back to that. What's the value that I offer, and what's the value that they can offer? And if we're joining forces here, we create something that's greater than the sum of our parts. And by the way, I'm not going to say that I'm a great podcaster. And that one of the reasons is because I'm one of those guys that likes to tell my stories. But however, I'm learning and I'm getting better and better. The crazy thing is, and we're going to get back to this, we're going to talk about delivery and mindset and other things like that. But the crazy thing is, you've got people like Gary Vee. Have you ever seen Gary Vee do a podcast? It's actually quite terrible. And that's because the guy like me struggles to stop talking. But however, and he has these famous people and he doesn't give them the chance to speak. So the first piece that I wanted to talk about there was getting on other people's podcasts. Before we move on to the next piece, is there anything that you'd like to add about that idea of getting on other people's podcasts?
So the first thing I want to say is getting on other people's podcasts without your podcast is like whistling at a car, expecting it to stop, or taking a full page magazine ad. It looks good, but whether you're going to get the results is something that you got to look at. So going on other people's podcasts might be cool, but if you really want results, having your own podcast, so that when someone listens to you on another person's show, you have some way to take them into your own world. Even if it's like 12 episodes, even if you give them a playlist of really cool things that you've curated in audio format as a podcast, then you're going to get way better results. So the first thing is to realize what the intention is and how you're going to get the people that are listening to you to become part of your audience. And that should be the key, right? How do you get people to you present to become part of your audience? If they want to know more, how do they find that? How do they get you? How do they get more of your thought leadership? So that's probably the main thing that I would say to someone that wants to go on 100 podcasts or a bunch of podcasts that as a guest, that if you're going to do it and make sure you can get a result from it, right? Just doing it and not having some place that someone can consume your work is just a waste of energy.
Which is actually a really good seg into our next piece. But if I was to break that down into a chunk, when we're talking about this idea of co-creation, it is about mindset. It is about knowing what value you can offer. And Ronsley's just made an important point there, is that if you have your own podcast, that also makes the conversation so much easier, because you can jump on their podcast, they can jump on your podcast, or you can record something together that you can both use as your own podcast. All you need to do is record a little bit of an introduction that says, hey, this week, Ronsley and I caught up to put something on both our podcasts.
Yep. Yeah, totally. As long as it's co-creation, right? It becomes easier to put that together.
I'm just gonna ask. Oh, gee, I'm just wondering whether I should ask the same dumb questions that everybody asked me. Okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna top three questions that I'm gonna ask, and you can answer them with the level of disregard that I should probably be given. But the first one is I'll always get is are you ready? What microphones do you use? I know that this is the dumbest first question.
Well, I mean, it's the right question to ask 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But nowadays, if you really want to start and you're worried about the tech, you can get your iPhone headphones and record on Zoom, and just that's your recording. Done. Don't get too fancy. Like, don't worry about the mic. Like, literally, that is not the problem. Because right now, Zoom is doing a couple of things, right? It doesn't matter like the microphone, but it's canceling out noise on either end. So it's already processing this noise, this conversation, to make it clearer for you and clearer for me. So it's already doing the stuff which, at the time when I started, none of this stuff was around, and we couldn't get microphones that good that would fit into earphones. So now that has all changed. There's really good stuff. So like, don't get too caught up about the microphone is going to be my answer.
So that's the question that everybody asks. What's the question that you would prefer that they asked you? What would be the better question to ask you?
Yeah, how do I start a podcast that grows my business? Like, how do I start a podcast that, gets me new audience, gets me revenue, gets me credibility? How do I create something where I show up for this amount of time and it gives me that amount of return? And that is probably, I think, the bit that people are not understanding, maybe because I'm not explaining it properly. It's like the return on you doing this rep is like so much. Not only are you having the conversation, it's creating content. Not only it's creating content, it's creating marketing. From marketing, it's creating all this other reach. You create distribution. You have other people that you can talk to who can go, yeah, you have a lead magnet. Let me tell my people about your lead magnet. There's all these different things that can happen as a result of you just having one conversation a week. So I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, if I'm going to have this one conversation a week for this kind of audience, how do I make it unique to me? And how do I create something that grows? And how do I keep evolving over time? So the microphone and all those kind of stuff will fix itself if that is the intention.
That's cool. So there's a couple elements to this. Once again, it's the same as, how do I get on podcasts? The first question is why? Why do you want to be on these other people's podcasts? If you don't, it's because just, you want to be, you want mummy to say that she's proud of you. Otherwise, I mean, like, if we're talking about why you want one, well, what is your strategy? That's what Ronsley's bringing it back to, strategy. And he's asked questions like, how do you make it unique to you? How do you do it in a way that's going to grow with you? And how are you going to do it in a way that's going to meet your commercial business goals and outcomes? We Are Podcast. Why did you start this event, We Are Podcast, Ronsley? Why'd you kick it off?
It's really funny because my wife just asked me this a couple of months ago, and she heard it for the first time then, because I never really told what the reason. So what was happening was I kind of saw the impact that podcasting was having in America and how businesses were using it. And I was like, Australian businesses need to know how to use a podcast. And this was back in 2015, right? So actually in 2014, it was when the first idea struck that maybe I should create the first podcasting conference in Australia, which now seems like...
And you never run a big event before, had you?
Yeah.
You'd never run a
No,
big event before, and it was huge. It was a big
not
event.
I never run an event where I was like, here are some tickets. Do you want to buy some? Like that was had never happened. So I started the podcast conference primarily to kind of show Australian business owners this is what you can do with a podcast. And it's crazy because it's not changed necessarily in all these years. It's just evolved to become different. We're getting more specific. I have the same issues that I have now that I want to fix that I had when I started my podcasting journey, which is I want more new audience, which I need more listeners. I need more revenue from this thing that I'm doing, and I need more credibility. So it's literally that's what we focus on, and we've just kind of honed it down and focused on those three things, and everything that we deliver now is on those three things. And if you see the kind of people that have spoken at We Are Podcast, that is kind of mental. I can't really wrap my head around the fact that there's all these amazing humans that decided to give their time to come and
there's halfway down the page, you've got John Lee Dumas. He's not even in the opening line. I mean, like, he must have, like, he'd be in the top 10 business podcasts in the world, wouldn't
he? Jordan actually Harbinger is probably in the top 10 easily. He gets about 10 to 12 million listeners a month on his podcast, which is absolutely crazy. But no, that's in alphabetical order, so that's why.
And Omar's amazing as well. He's got the $100 MBA, which is has won like Apple's iTunes Podcast of the Year, which is kind of like the
just crossed 200 million downloads. He's speaking this year as well,
which is like it's kind of like the Oscars of podcasts, and he came in at like Best Picture. Is pretty much what Omar did. He's based in Sydney, really great guy. And the next event is happening. Give us the dates. I saw it somewhere around here.
November 10th and 11th here in Brisbane. It is at Light Space. So if you hit on events up the top there, James. You'll go to the actual page for the event, and you'll see what we're going to cover. We'll see the different tickets.
This the prices? I'm holding back on the prices. That's what everyone wants to know. I'll tell you, I'm going to come back to this page, and I'm going to come back to it a little bit later, and I'm going to reveal what the investment is if you're wanting to go to that conference. I try to go every year because it is the best. And it is also just so outrageously fun. Out of all the conferences that I go to, I don't know what it is, Ronsley, but maybe like podcast people are just a more laid back, open, receptive, friendly group of people.
No, well, it's the curation. I spend a lot of time curating the actual day, the flow of the day. It's not all content. There's 30% of group work. There is networking that's involved. There's questions that I get people to ask each other. The speakers hang out at the tables. It's all curated. Every single second of We Are Podcast is curated.
So it's not the industry, it's you, Ronsley. It's your careful curation skills, your no dickhead policy.
Absolutely. And it is also that podcasters like meeting other podcasters. They kind of really understand the work that goes into putting out a podcast, and they understand that someone else is going to understand them as well. And with most cases, people don't want to be like, don't want to feel alone, right? So that's why it turns out.
Maybe it is. Podcasting can be a lonely thing. You're sitting in your little booth in your own. You can do it anywhere in the world, and that's the way it works. Anything that you want to bring up about this? Anything that you want to add, Ronsley?
Yeah, I mean, most events are kind of like all about the content, but we are very specific that our people, our business owners, our podcasters, or people that are looking to start a podcast like now. So they've already kind of had the idea that they want to, we're not here to convince people that a podcast is a good idea. We're kind of here to go, you are a podcaster, you're a business owner. This is how you get more revenue, more clients, more credibility, more listeners, more new audience. And we focus on three things, which is the teaching part, and something that you can come to learn. the connecting part, so that you feel like you can get some of your answers, the questions that you feel like maybe only you're going through, which I guarantee is not the case. And the networking part is really important. Like, we kind of feel like the best thing that a podcaster can do, or any business owner can do, is know other podcasters, because it's just like knowing other radio hosts, knowing other journalists. Podcasters are actually have an audience. So any business owner that wants access to hundreds of podcasters should really be at We Are Podcast, because that's probably the easiest way to kind of get on other podcasts.
We had a wild experience one of the years where I went, and one of the speakers was like, Nathan Chan had lost his slides or something. So he jumped up on the stage, the slides came up, it wasn't the right slides. And he's like, what are you gonna do here? And Ronsley invited me up onto the stage, and we played this game where I said, who doesn't have a podcast and wants one? And half the room raised their hand. And I said, who's got a podcast? The other room raised their hand. And all I did was I said, what's holding you back? They'd say the problem. And then I'd go, you, give them the answer. Is this crazy collegial, wild environment. Ronsley, any final words of advice before I hit the off button?
Yes. Everyone here that's watching and listening, understand that our institutions have not helped us to put our voices out there. They don't want to stand out. We're not trained to stand out. And the best thing you can do for the next generation, the people that are looking towards you, their children, the people around you, your team, is to actually go and put your voice out there, because it's not something that's normal. It's not something that people know how to do effectively. And if you can do that, you're at least giving other people the permission to do the same. So that's what I'm going to end on. Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, for playing hard and being so engaged. Exciting to do this. Thank you for everything.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Ronsley. Thank you, crew. It's bye from me, bye from Ronsley, bye from Maddie, bye from our other people from behind the team, and it's bye for now.